The frontier trail lay stripped bare beneath the noon sun, a pale ribbon of dust cutting through a land that offered no mercy. Heat shimmered in waves, bending the horizon until the earth itself seemed to waver. Even the wind had given up. Overhead, buzzards circled slow and patient, their shadows sliding across the ground like a promise waiting to be kept. The orphan walked anyway. Each step was an argument with hunger. Boots worn thin scraped against stone. A small frame bent forward, stubborn more than strong, driven by nothing but the knowledge that stopping meant dying. The child's lips were cracked, eyes sunken, belly hollow enough to ache with every breath. In one grim little pocket, wrapped in cloth, lay the last piece of bread, hard, dry, and precious beyond measure. That was when the trail offered something unexpected. An old man lay sprawled just off the road, half in the dust, half in the weeds. His hat had fallen away, revealing hair gone white and thin. His chest rose only faintly, each breath a shallow theft from whatever time he had left. Skin clung to bone. Hands trembled uselessly at his sides. He had the look of someone the trail had already claimed. The orphan stopped. For a long moment the world held its breath. This was the frontier's favorite test. Walk on and live another hour. Stop and gamble everything on a stranger who might already be dead. The child knelt slowly, knees biting into the hot dirt, and pressed fingers to the old man's wrist. There was a pulse, weak, stubborn, refusing to let go. The cloth was unwrapped. That bread had been meant for later, for nightfall, for survival. Instead, it was broken cleanly in half. No hesitation, no bargaining with fate. The orphan lifted the old man's head and pressed the bread gently to his lips, coaxing him to chew, to swallow, to stay. The old man's eyes fluttered open just once. They were sharp beneath the exhaustion. Knowing. He looked at the child, at the bread, at the choice that had just been made for him. Neither of them spoke. Above them the buzzards wheeled, annoyed. The trail waited, indifferent. And the orphan did not know, could not know, that this frail, forgotten man was the owner of the largest ranch in the territory. That power slept behind those tired eyes. That a kingdom of land, men, and iron gates rested on the breath being saved by crumbs. One piece of bread was given. And the frontier, which never forgot a debt, took notice. Night came fast on the trail, dropping its weight without apology. The heat bled out of the land, leaving behind a brittle cold that settled into bones already worn thin. The orphan said nothing as they walked, keeping pace beside the old man, one hand hovering near his elbow in case his legs gave out again. Trust wasn't spoken. It was measured in steps. They found a shallow cut in the land just as the last light failed, a place where the wind slipped overhead instead of straight through. The orphan gathered dead brush with practiced speed. Fingers moving like this wasn't the first night spent begging the dark for mercy. A small fire caught, weak but alive. The old man sat heavy, breathing hard, his coat hanging loose on a frame that looked carved by years rather than age alone. The child passed him the canteen. He drank slow, careful, like he knew what it meant to waste nothing. When he handed it back, his eyes lingered on the orphan's face, searching for something he didn't name. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. The orphan shrugged. "Didn't cost you." That wasn't true. They both knew it. But neither said so. They shared what little remained, crumbs of bread, a strip of dried meat. The orphan ate last, watching the old man's hands shake less as warmth returned. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, not kind. Just wary. Out here names were promises. And promises had a way of getting you killed. "You got folks?" the old man asked, not looking up. The orphan poked at the fire. "Had." That was enough. The old man nodded once, as if he understood more than he should. The wind picked up, tugging at the firelight. Somewhere in the dark something moved. The orphan's shoulders tightened, ready to bolt if needed. The old man noticed. He shifted, placing himself between the child and the night without a word. When dawn was still only a rumor, the old man spoke again. "You shouldn't walk alone," he said. "Neither should I." The orphan studied him, suspicion sharp as hunger. "You don't even know my name." The old man smiled faintly, pain creasing his face. "Names can wait." At first light, they would travel together. Not because they trusted the road, but because sometimes surviving meant choosing the unknown over certain ruin. They traveled together because hunger left little room for pride. The trail wound through scorched grass and stone, and each mile demanded something from the body. The orphan learned the old man's pace by watching his breath, learned when to stop by the way his shoulders sagged. In return, the old man learned the child's quiet strength, the way small hands gathered mesquite beans, the way a scrap of cloth became a bandage, the way fear was swallowed and turned into forward motion. They spoke little. Hunger did the talking. Hunger taught quickly. The child's story surfaced in pieces, never all at once. A burned-out cabin remembered in the wrong season. A mother's hands gone cold before the ground froze. Men who offered work and took more than they paid. Nights slept near roads because roads meant movement, and movement meant survival. The frontier had a way of forgetting those it chewed through, and the orphan had learned to be forgettable, small, quiet, quick. But when cornered there was fire. A sharp word. A stance too steady for someone so young. And yet, when the old man stumbled, the child did not leave him. Compassion, it seemed, had survived the worst days. The old man never told his own story straight. Came out sideways in habits. He rose before dawn, even when there was no need. He studied the land as if reading a ledger, counting water, wind, cover. He knew the names of creeks that no longer ran and the taste of soil where grass would return after rain. When they passed a fence line sagging under its own weight, he paused, adjusted a post with practiced hands, and moved on without comment. Leadership showed in the smallest choices. Where to camp, when to wait, when to push. Authority worn thin but intact. At night the fire drew them close. The orphan noticed how the old man never sat with his back to open ground, how his eyes lifted at distant sounds before the ears could catch them. He chewed slowly, as if savoring more than food, memory perhaps. When the child asked where he was headed, the answer came gentle and incomplete. West, he said once. Another night, home. Neither explanation satisfied, and both felt true. A mystery settled between them, not heavy but patient. Trust grew the way calluses do by use. The orphan shared a trick for stretching bread to last 2 meals. The old man showed how to read cloud edges for rain. They laughed once, surprised by it, and the sound faded into the dark like something rare and valuable. With every mile, the question followed them. Who was this old man who knew so much and carried so little? And why did he walk the trail alone? The orphan didn't press. Hunger had taught the first lesson. Patience would teach the rest. The riders came out of the heat like a bad thought you couldn't shake. 3 of them spread loose across the trail, hats low, rifles resting easy in the crook of their arms. They saw the pair before they were seen. An orphan thin as a fence rail and an old man bent by the road. Easy pickings. That was the way the frontier trained men to think. One rider smiled first. "Ain't this somethin'?" he said, easing his horse closer. "World's full of takers, and you two look like you ain't got much left to give." His eyes slid to the orphan's pack. Food in there. The orphan stiffened. Hunger had taught them when to run, when to hide, and when neither would matter. "We don't want trouble," they said, voice steady but small. The man laughed. "Trouble don't need wanton. A hand reached down, fingers brushing the orphan's shoulder. That was when the old man straightened. Not fast. Not loud. Just enough. "Step away from the child," he said. The riders turned, surprised by the iron in his voice. It didn't belong to a beggar. It belonged to someone used to being obeyed. The lead rider scoffed, but uncertainty crept in. "And who are you supposed to be, old-timer?" The old man met his gaze, unblinking. "Someone who knows this land," he said. "And someone who remembers names." Silence fell. The wind carried dust across their boots. The lead rider weighed the words. Then the man who spoke them. Something in that calm, measured practice put a hook in his gut. He spat, waved his men back. "Ain't worth it," he muttered. "Come on." They rode off without another word. The orphan didn't breathe until the sound faded. When they looked up, the old man was already walking, as if nothing had happened. As if threats bowed to him out of habit. That night, by the fire, the orphan watched him with new eyes. Hunger could sharpen kindness. It could also sharpen lies. And the old man, this frail stranger, had stood like the road belonged to him. The orphan didn't ask. Not yet. But the question stayed. Morning came thin and pale, stretching slowly over the trail like a tired promise. The old man rose before the sun, joints stiff, breath shallow but his eyes sharp. He didn't waste words. He never had. He pointed to the land instead. To the way the grass bent, to the rocks that hid shade, to the faint tracks most folks would miss. "Don't fight the road," he said once. "Read it." The orphan learned quickly. How to walk where the ground gave back less heat. How to sip water, not drink it. How to rest without stopping. The old man showed how to watch the horizon. Not for what was moving but for what wasn't. Silence, he said, could be louder than gunfire. Especially on the frontier. They made small preparations, careful ones. The orphan gathered edible roots and berries the old man pointed out, learning which plants lied and which saved lives. They patched a torn bedroll with twine scavenged from an abandoned wagon. The old man tightened the orphan's boots with strips cut from his own worn belt, hands steady despite the tremor in them. "You walk wrong," he muttered, crouching to fix the laces. "You won't walk far." Routes were chosen with care. They avoided the open stretches where riders could see for miles. Took dry creek beds, narrow cuts in the land where sound didn't travel as far. When they stopped at night, they never lit the fire in the same place twice. Never left it burning long. Habit. Hard-earned. At first, the orphan followed out of necessity. Hunger had taught obedience early. But something changed as the days wore on. The lessons weren't barked like orders. They were given like trust. The old man watched, corrected once, then stepped back. Let the child decide. Let mistakes be small and survivable. One evening, as the sky bled orange into dusk, the orphan split the last of their bread without being asked. Passed half across the fire. The old man paused, then smiled just a little. Later they laughed. Quiet laughter. The kind that slips out when no one's listening. Over nothing important. Over how bad the coffee tasted. Over the way the road never did what you expected. The orphan wasn't just surviving anymore. They were preparing. And somewhere between repaired boots and shared meals, between lessons spoken and lessons shown, trust settled in. Not loud. Not sudden. Solid. The land changed before the orphan understood why. The dust-packed trail widened, flattening into something worn smooth by hooves and wagon wheels. Fence posts began to appear, straight, deliberate, stretching farther than the eye could easily count. Then came the cattle. Hundreds of them. Then more. Black shapes moving like a slow tide under the sun. The orphan stopped walking. Ahead rose the ranch. Not a shack. Not a lonely homestead. But a sprawl of barns, corrals, windmills, and long low buildings crouched against the horizon like a frontier town all its own. Riders moved along the fences. Smoke lifted from cook fires. Men worked with purpose, not desperation. The child turned to the old man, breath caught. "You said you didn't have a place." The old man said nothing at first. He straightened just a little. Enough to change how the world looked at him. Enough to change how he looked at the world. "I said I was walking," he replied quietly. "Not that I was lost." Before the orphan could ask more, riders broke from the ranch and came fast. Hooves thundered. Dust rose. Rifles were visible now. The child's hand instinctively tightened around the old man's sleeve. "Stay behind me," the old man said. The riders reined in hard, eyes narrowing when they recognized him. Faces drained of color. One man slid from his saddle too quickly, hat clutched to his chest. "Sir," he said. We didn't know you were returning today." The old man's voice was no longer frail. It carried. "That's plain enough." Word spread like fire in dry grass. Men gathered. Whispers raced. The orphan felt the weight of it without understanding all of it. Felt the air change, felt power realign. Then the antagonists stepped forward. Men with clean coats and careful smiles. Men who had grown comfortable making decisions while the owner was gone. One of them looked at the orphan with open disdain. "What's this?" he said. "You bringing strays in now?" The old man's eyes hardened. "That stray fed me when I was dying." The man scoffed. "Child's nothing but a burden. We had arrangements. Papers. Plans." The orphan felt the word plans like a hook in the ribs. The old man stepped forward, and silence followed him. "You planned," he said, "to profit off someone you thought had no one." The man bristled. "This ranch needs order. Needs strength. Not sentiment." That was when the first gun was drawn. Not fired. Just shown. That was enough. Chaos broke loose. Shouts. Men scrambling. The orphan was pulled behind a wagon as shots cracked across the yard. Horses screamed. Dust exploded from the ground. It wasn't a battle for land. It was a battle for control. The old man moved through it with terrifying clarity. Orders barked. Loyal hands responded. The men who had abused his absence found themselves suddenly alone. Outnumbered, exposed. One tried to run. He didn't get far. Another turned his weapon on the child. That was his last mistake. The old man put himself between them without hesitation. You want authority, he growled. Here it stands. The man froze. Dropped the gun. By the time the dust settled, the ranch stood quiet again, but different. The old man faced the gathered workers, blood on his sleeve, dust in his beard. I left this place to see what kind of men you'd be without me, he said. Some of you failed. Eyes dropped. No one argued. He turned then to the orphan. Kneeled. You fed me when you had nothing, he said softly. No one here will ever touch you again. The child didn't speak. Couldn't. The ranch loomed behind them, no longer a threat, but a truth. Kindness had walked into power. And power had answered. The dust settled slow across the ranch, drifting down like the last word in an argument no one could escape. Men who had stood loud moments earlier now stood quiet, eyes lowered, authority stripped from them as cleanly as a badge torn from a coat. Justice on the frontier rarely came gentle, but when it came honest, it stayed. The old man's voice, no longer frail, carried across the yard with a calm that ended all dispute. Order returned not through fear, but through truth spoken aloud. The gates swung open. For the orphan, the change felt unreal. Only days ago, hunger had been a constant ache, a shadow that followed every step. Now there was water drawn clean, bread set without counting, a name spoken with care. No one called the child boy or girl anymore. They asked who they were, what they knew, what they wished to learn. Safety did not arrive like a promise. It arrived like solid ground beneath tired feet. Clouds gathered where the sky had been hard and white. A low rumble rolled over the land, and then rain came, slow at first, then steady, darkening the soil, washing the trail dust from boots and blood from boards. The ranch breathed again. Gates stood open. Fields drank deep. Dawn followed, pale and clean, laying gold across fences that now meant protection, not prison. The old man found the orphan at the edge of the yard, watching it all like someone afraid it might vanish. He placed a hand on the child's shoulder, steady, warm. You saved my life twice, he said quietly. Once with bread. Once with mercy. The orphan didn't answer. Didn't need to. Kindness had crossed a desert and come back changed, bigger than hunger, stronger than power. And on that morning, beneath an open sky, it finally found a home. Out on the frontier, power was measured in acres, in rifles, in how many men answered when your name was called. But the land had a way of revealing the truth. Power without humanity rotted fast. It left emptiness where loyalty should be, fear where trust once stood. And in the end, it could not save a man lying alone on a dusty trail. That orphan had nothing. No roof. No future promised. Barely enough bread to quiet the ache in their stomach. And still they gave. They chose mercy when the frontier would have forgiven cruelty. They shared what little they had, not knowing who the old man was or what he owned, but knowing he was human. So let me ask you, traveler, what would you have done? When hunger pressed in and tomorrow was uncertain, would you have held tight to your last scrap? Or would you have broken it in half and trusted the road to remember? If this story stirred something in you, leave your thoughts here, where voices still carry across the plains. And if you wish to keep riding these long frontier trails with us, through stories of justice, sacrifice, and hard-earned hope, then subscribe and stay close to the fire. The sun sets now over wide-open land. The ranch stands quiet, and a child who once walked alone stands safe at its heart, proof that mercy, even when given in hunger, can build something that lasts.